Hi, guys, and welcome to the War Story podcast, little history corner episode today. As you probably know by now, it's my intention to record and archive interviews with as many of our veterans as possible from as many different conflicts as possible. And where this isn't possible, then I'd like to ask experts on to fill in those gaps of our history, because just because those people are no longer with us from those periods, of course, we cannot forget them. So where it's not possible to find veterans where they're perhaps scarce, which is sadly the case with the Second World War now, I ask an expert to come on and tell us about a particular battle or campaign. Today's guest, Tim Saunders, he is himself a former British Army infantry officer, served with the D&Ds, Devon and Dorsets. He's now a military historian, and his work was very important, formed a very important basis of the book that I wrote, published last year, Voices of Victory. If it wasn't for historians like Tim, I would not have the framework on which to lie the personal accounts of our soldiers. So very grateful to him. It was great to have him on the podcast. And on the note of Voices of Victory as well, just want to say a massive thank you to those of you who came down to Aces High Gallery in Oxfordshire last week. Fantastic to see you in person. It's obviously a bit weird being an author because you spend a lot of time on your own, and even though you're working on other people's stories and then people are reading your books, it's very rare that I actually kind of interact with people in the real world rather than online. So if you made the trip, and I know a lot of you came from great distances, it's very much appreciated. Meant a lot to me, really did. And it's kind of given me a taste for doing more things like that, to be quite honest. Obviously, I'm very deeply care about spreading the word on these soldiers and on these campaigns. So I'm obviously not alone in that. Just for those of you who weren't there, one of the reasons it meant so much was that last year I went to the Reichswald Forest War Cemetery on the 80th anniversary of Operation Veritable. That was like the break-in battle, the British break-in battle into Germany. There's more than 3,000 British soldiers buried in the Reichswald Forest War Cemetery. And obviously on the 80th anniversary, you'd be hoping that there'd be some kind of commemoration, some kind of wreath laying, something like that going on. And unfortunately, there was nothing. There was just us, me and a couple of friends in there, and that was it. So to be able to go from that to a year later to a room full of people who deeply care about the subject as well, then that it meant a lot. Yeah, let's just leave it at that. If you get any value out of today's podcast, guys, as I know you will, you know the score, please do share it with a friend. It's all we ask. Share things around, and if you are interested in books on the Second World War, I cannot recommend Tim's books highly enough. I've got a bunch of them myself. Like I said, they were invaluable. With Voices of Victory, we're going to be concentrating on the Battle of Caen today, so switching over to Normandy. But yeah, the level of research that goes into them is second to none. So I really thoroughly recommend them. And coming up next week, we have another War Story episode. Is going to be with a B-52 crewman. So we've never had one of those before. Touching on all kinds of periods from the Cold War, Gulf War One, the invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan. It's all in there. It's a cracking episode. So keep your eyes peeled, or ears peeled, or whatever you're peeling. Keep those peeled for next week. Until then, guys, I hope you enjoy today's episode. And yeah, thanks again for everyone who came down last week. Great to see you. Tim, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Fine, thank you, Graham.
It's great to have you here. You are a former British Army veteran yourself. So you'll be in a good company with a lot of our guests, but you are also a historian and an expert on many areas of the Second World War. And the one that we're going to talk about in particular today is the Battle of Caen. I guess the first thing, before we kind of start getting into the particulars, I'd just like to know where your interest came from in for this period. Like, how did you settle on this as something that you wanted to dive into?
Well, as a boy, it was military modelling, wargaming, and all of that sort of stuff. But obviously, when I went and joined the army, I had the usual young man sabbatical of wine, women, and song. But as a captain, I got back into it again, really, at the depot where we were encouraged to do lectures, a part of junior officer education, and I got back into by collecting in a small way, and then really properly through battlefield tours. We were very fortunate. I was in the Devon and Dorsets, 2 battalions that landed on Gold Beach. We had a very active colonel of the regiment, Brigadier Speedy Breeden, who had been the second in command and later commanding officer. And he did trips there every year. And those trips, I remember them quite well, or many incidents in them quite well. Veterans talking, so that really piqued my interest. But gradually, as time's gone by, one can exhaust the immediate bit of the one's regimental history and start looking wider. And these days, with the amalgamations that have taken place, now I'm sort of also interested in not just sort of the antecedents, Devon and Dorsets, but the rifles as well. One of my books coming out shortly is 8th Rifle Brigade.
Brilliant. So I just want to. So when you were on these early battlefield tours, you had veterans of the campaigns actually there with you, show you around.
Yes, absolutely. Ranging from in the 1970s, these were actually senior officers in the battalion who had made decisions and had able to tell you why they had done it. But obviously, they were a few years older than most. And by the 1980s, certainly the 1990s, they were not really fit to travel. So it then became much more about, what it was like to be an infantryman or a tanker or a gunner or whatever, than actually why they were doing it. Because these guys, younger guys, by and large, were much more junior.
I mean, I know we must have a lot of people listening right now who are green with envy at the thought of being shown around these battlefields by the people who were there. Moving into, oh yes, I mean it's something that I always find fascinating. The some of the stories that you come across from people who are, I think that John Howard, I forget who it was, but he was quite famously very friendly with some of the. Was it Hans von Luck, who he was very friendly with? Yeah. And I always find that quite fascinating. The idea of us sitting down for tea with the Taliban one day is, I think, quite a foreign concept to a lot of us. So yeah, moving on to Caen. Obviously, it didn't just come around by chance that this was going to be a decisive point in the Battle for Normandy. So, could you tell us about when Caen was identified as a key objective for the Normandy campaign, and by who and for what reasons, please?
Well, it was as a part of the Cossack analysis. Chief of Staff, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Morgan. He was given the task of planning the outline of D-Day, the where it should be. And once that was settled, based basically on overnight sea crossing within range, good beaches, accessible ports, and a fair few other factors. Once all that had been agreed by the late summer, he set about creating an outline plan, which he always said was just to get the thing going, because whoever was going to be the commander would obviously do his own thing. And he identified the city of Caen as a key place. If we didn't have it, the Germans would, and once the Germans had got it, it would be the devil's own job to get them out. The problem was that he was heavily constrained. He had just 3 assault divisions and parts of 2 airborne divisions and a number of commandos. So really under-resourced. These were the amount of forces that the combined chiefs of staff thought would be available in when they made the decisions in 1943, and more to the point that the British were willing to make available, because the Brits weren't, certainly initially, all that convinced about Overlord. Churchill himself would much rather have gone elsewhere, i.e. the Mediterranean. But Morgan identified Caen, and he, in his plan, he was going to capture the 8 miles of the River Orne and Caen Canal between Ouistreham and the city itself, with a single brigade of British paratroopers. So the brigade of paratroopers, just to do the 8 miles from the canal up to the city, a huge task, huge area. But of course, that was measured against the opposition that was there at the time, which wasn't, frankly, very much at all. But everything started to change in November 1943, and this was when von Rundstedt, the CNC West, sent a message to Berlin, basically saying, look here, the Allies are now on mainland Europe, and in Italy, of course. They'll be coming here next. And this really shook Hitler out of his attention on the Eastern Front. And he wrote Führerbefehl, Führer Order number 51. And at the same time, appointed Field Marshal Rommel as commander of Army Group B and of Inspector General of the Atlantic Wall. And so things really started to motor from that point. And one of the first things Rommel did was to go on a tour of the Atlantic Wall, such as it was at the time. And really, it was very poor. The defences on the coast were mainly concentrated around the major ports and the minor ports, such as Ouistreham, Courcelles and Grand Champ-Mazy, think ports like that. But was not at all impressed. One of his early encounters with the commander of 84 Corps, that's German 84 Corps, Erich Marx, whose own analysis was that actually if we want to hold my core area, which basically was Normandy, we must hold not only the ports, but the city of Caen as well. And Rommel's response to this was to start to shift around divisions, and coming up behind the 716th Coastal Division, which held the entire front from just beyond Ouistreham right the way up to the bottom of the Cotillon Peninsula at the time, and he placed 77th German Infantry Division in depth behind the Coastal Division between the coast and the city. And one can see their work today in the tactical overprint maps that the Allies prepared. And you can see trenches, mines, barbed wire, barring the main routes to the city of Caen. And so by the time Montgomery took over in January, this sort of wasn't actually clear. Ultra hadn't really got a clear picture of what 77th Division was doing, that they were there. So Montgomery just started to adapt the plan. But it was very clear to him that a single brigade would not be adequate at the time when the Germans were clearly already starting to get the cement mixers out, the shovels, the barbed wire and mines. So he cancelled that particular one. And what he did was, as part of his rejigging the plan, to the west, he inserted Utah Beach so that the American 7th U.S. Corps would have a clear run, as he hoped, up to Cherbourg, capture the port up there, a very important part of the plan. And in our area to the east, he inserted Sword Beach. Sword Beach, or what became Sword Beach, had been ignored by the naval planners and by General Morgan. The reason being, it was very narrow. Just 800 yards between the rocks to the west at Lyon-sur-Mer and the broad open sands around Ouistreham, which and there was just about 800 yards in the middle. So he inserted a beach there. It was wide enough for a single brigade group to land. And this division, his old 3rd Division that he had commanded in 1940, was now going to be this division that was responsible for capturing Caen. And it inherited very much the intention to capture Caen on the first day from Morgan. But things were developing. Every day, the aircraft from the PRU, photo reconnaissance units, came back with more and more photographs of the beach defences and new foundations being laid. And it was quite clear that what had been a fairly straightforward task, or envisaged as being, was rapidly becoming something far more difficult. And right from the early times, things started being hedged about whether they would make it. And, phrases in the orders and the reports from capturing Caen on the first day to capturing it on the first day or soon thereafter started to appear. But the big change that made all the difference was in March, after von Rundstedt had sent his appreciation via the Lorenz attachment, much more complicated version of Enigma, 20,000 characters or so, which explained his estimate and his plan. And of course, Hitler attention had returned from the Eastern Front and from the first, second, and third battles of Cassino to the west. And Rommel finally got his way, and he could get a word in edgeways with Hitler. And of course, all the time, Fortitude, our deception plan, was cranking away, and of course, never 100%, but German photo recce was getting over the south coast. And the combination of all those factors really showed the Germans, Hitler in particular, that there were far more Allied divisions available in the UK than they could possibly use in Pas de Calais. So Fortitude had overcooked it. Not very fashionable to say it, but that's a fact. And of course, photo recce had picked up the fact that there was far more shipping down the west, in the ports of the West Country, than really if the landing was going to be exclusively at the Pas de Calais. While remaining convinced, and he did, convinced that the invasion would be in Pas de Calais, he and his staff believed that there would be a preliminary or certainly a secondary landing. And where would that landing be? They did all the same analysis of beaches, towns, ports, etc., as Morgan had done, and said, yep, it's going to be in Normandy. So, everybody said, oh, it's Hitler's intuition. Actually, no, it wasn't. It was a proper military calculation. We had Brits and the Americans, too much kit for one place, too spread out, secondary landing. And that was to be in Normandy. And finally, as far as the defences of Caen were concerned, at this point, Rommel, who had been arguing for his string of pearls, i.e. the panzers behind the beach, the panzers that had very nearly at Salerno defeated the 36th Texas Division by being within a couple of hours, he got authority to move 21st Panzer Division from Brittany, swapping with the 77th, and plonking them behind the 716th Coastal Division. At the same time, there was a wider reinforcement of Normandy, and the only other place in the whole invasion coast where there was actually a second proper fighting formation behind the Coastal Division was on the Cotillon Peninsula, once again, to stop the Americans having a nice, easy run up to Cherbourg. And that was the 91st Luftlandser Division. So by, and of course, the photo recce was showing up tank tracks, increasing numbers of track vehicle markings in the fields around Caen. They knew this was coming. It had been picked up by Ultra, but of course Ultra was only available to army commanders. So at this late stage, they couldn't start saying, what are we going to do? Can we delay? We've already built up the force as much as we can. And so they had no choice. And gradually, those air photographs, they couldn't say, it became apparent that there was much, much more between the beaches and Caen than just a concrete hardened crust of a coastal division.
And what kind of strength would 21st Panzer be at this time? 21st
Panzer Division was a full Panzer Division. In terms of numbers, it was virtually full strength. It was made up mainly of re-engineered French 1940 vehicle, Alfred Becker, Baustab Becker, converting these French vehicles with mounting German weapons. The only thing that they didn't have initially was with French radios. They had those from Germany. But latterly, right up to the last moment, Panzer IVs were arriving. So they had, rather than a red battalion of Panzer IVs and a battalion of Panthers, they had two battalions of Panzer IVs. But what they also had was a battalion of Pack 43 88. These are not the big cruciform ones. These are still actually pretty big, but these were the towed ones, so much lower profile. And they were split, as with the whole division, the infantry division, 125 to the east and 192 to the west of the Orne, and the panzers back towards Falaise within 2 hours, 3 hours motoring. So, this was Rommel getting a bit of his string of pearls, which in itself indicates how important the city of Caen was to the Germans. And now it was heavily defended. And one company commander in the Shropshire Light Infantry, said in his diary, I expect to be 20 miles inland within a couple of days of D-Day on my bicycles. few weeks later, he was being far more circumspect about that, as the reality of what's actually facing them was beginning to sink in, although it wasn't widely broadcast and doesn't seem to have hit the radar of many historians, even 80 years after the event.
So so it sounds like from what you're saying that this never really kind of trickled down to the guys who were going to make the landings. By the way, there's a Panzer division kind of probably waiting between you and your objectives.
There were broad hints. One might expect a counterattack by mid-morning. It was hedged around, and even on the 5th of June, the 21st Army Group, Sitrep, was hedging around. We might yet find that 352nd Division has come forward to the coast, and there are more panzers than we thought. Hinted broad hints. They couldn't say it bang bang because of the rules to protect ultra.
So by the time that the time came around to launch the operation, cross the channel, get onto the beaches, who at this point then, if not the parachute brigade, had responsibility for getting to Caen on D-Day?
Right. Well, that was now 3rd Division. The 3rd Division's plan was to land with a single brigade, because that's all that could land, and that very narrow beach. 8th Brigade, they would form the beachhead and push inland to gain a toehold on the Perrier's Ridge, which was a position nicknamed Hillman. Hillman was the headquarters of Oberst Krug of 736th Coastal Infantry Regiment. It wasn't a gun battery, though it did have 2 anti-tank guns, towed tank anti-tank guns, and a goodly number of machine guns in place around it. The task of getting to Caen fell to 185 Brigade. 3 battalions, one of them, 2nd King's Shropshire Light Infantry, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Morris. They were going to get in land and at Hermanville on Line Mallet, Report Line Mallet, about 2 miles inland, and from there, with the Staffordshire Yeomanry, they would dash inland to Caen on the road from Hermanville, straight up over Point 361, down through Beeville and Beauville, Le Bessay, and on into the city. The other 2 battalions, on the right, 2nd Warwicks, and on the left, the Norfolks, would make their way to 2 objectives on the northern edge of the city, called Wine and Port. Today on Ring Contour 60, which is literally just inside the northern extent of the periphery. You can still see the mound there. So 185 Brigade, and in particular KSLI and Staffordshire Yeomanry.
Yeah, so on the subject of the yeomanry, then this would be the armoured support for the infantry on the British side. So, yeah, can you tell us a bit more about that? What kind of numbers would we be looking at, and how would they be getting ashore?
Well, they would be coming ashore by landing craft as a part of what was known as the Intermediate Brigade, 185 Brigade. The first assault, which will no doubt come to in a bit, was to be conducted by the 13th, 18th Hussars with DD. So these were normal Sherman squadrons of 19 tanks, a mixture of Sherman 75s and the 17-pounder Fireflies. That they would come ashore, and we'll hear what happened to them later, no doubt. They would marry up with the KSLI, who in exercises had rehearsed basically doing this thrust up the road, going hell for leather, with the infantry clinging on for grim death on the back of the tanks. So that was the plan. Of course, if they came into contact, they would deal with them.
And speaking of plans, as we all know, no plan survives contact with the enemy or the weather. So where did things start going wrong when it came to seizing Caen?
What could have been feasible if the Germans had collapsed on D-Day or had decided to pull back rather than fight it out, actually started to come unwound with the weather. The weather that had throughout May had been pretty good. The photographs of Exercise Fabius, the rehearsal for the operation at the end of April, early May, flat calm. You couldn't have been better. But in the last days of May, the weather ships out in the Atlantic and the weather stations in the Caribbean, up in the Canadian Arctic, all the way across west, there started to report unsettled conditions there, and which, as we know from the Coriolis force, it sends them our way. And so by the 3rd and 4th of May, things were beginning to look bad, and Eisenhower was forced to delay by 24 hours from the 5th to the 6th, because for instance, the Americans in Weymouth Harbour, Portland Harbour, report waves breaking over Chesil Bank, and Chesil Bank is actually a pretty monumental structure of shingle, and so the decision was right. But the troops were all embarked. They were briefed. They knew where they were going, and they knew the entire D-Day secret. And following morning, when Stagg reported, as I think everybody knows, that there was this window of weather, Eisenhower had little option but to say, "Okay, we go." Montgomery was very favor of it. The airmen said marginal for air operations, and the Navy said yes, but the landings will be slow. And so, by making that decision, let's face it, it was a decision he had to make. He couldn't have put off D-Day for another 2 weeks for the next coincidence of tide and moon. And anyway, that around the 19th and 20th would have been when another storm was raging, and that would have put the invasion back into July. It was unconscionable, really. So and it was a risk, and that risk played itself out with the landing.
In what sense?
In the sense that the sea state was not at all as had been hoped. The waves were a lot higher, and the immediate effect, as far as the landing was concerned, was that the DD tanks that were to have been released around 8,000 yards out to sea, the decision was made, the code word sent, splash 5,000, which meant that the LSTs, landing ships tank, bringing the 13th, 18th Hussars in, they were going to be put out at 5,000 yards. Still a long way out to sea, bearing in mind that on Gold Beach, the Navy there actually brought the Sherwood Rangers and the 47th Dragoon Guards in to wading distance. So they waded with their screens. And somebody explained to me, seaman years ago, that there's some freak of nature that the waves get bigger and bigger in that bay, the Baie de Seine, further you go west. And so that's why the Americans on Omaha had some really big waves to contend with. But the 13th, 18th Hussars, they lost 4 tanks, only 4 tanks out to sea. One went straight off the end of the ramp of the landing craft and down. 3 others got swamped. But they were making less than half the speed they should have done inshore. And so that meant that even though they'd come in further, they were still running behind time. And the LSTs, with the second wave, who would be the breaching teams from 79th Armoured Division, they were catching up. And in some cases, they had to reverse or try and... it was almost impossible to stop. You'd just get blown around and drift. So they had to slow down. And in some cases, some of those 4 tanks that were lost at sea were actually run over by LSTs, because the LST bridge, there was this huge ramp at the front, and they couldn't. The skipper couldn't see what was immediately in front of him. So the DDs got ashore. Their tracks hit the beach, still with the screens up. They engaged the tracks, turned off the propeller, motored up the beach until they were in a sort of semi-hull down position, still in the water with the sea around them, and they dropped the screen. And the plan was that turrets would have been able to traverse left and right, and they would be able to engage targets anywhere, because there was going to be a pause between the stopping of the naval bombardment and the land and the engineers, the assault teams followed by the engineers and infantry landing, and the 13th, 18th Hussars, 38 DD tanks were going to actually bridge that gap. But what happened was that because they had been so slow, the gaps between the tanks, the breaching teams, the infantry, the engineers, they had all closed up. And so as the screens were being dropped and the guns were getting ready to fire, coming up alongside them were the LSTs. And that meant, basically, and they went straight onto the beach, and that meant that the tanks, their arc of fire was now whatever happened to be directly in front of them. If there was nothing there weren't much they could do about it at this stage. And while they were on the beach at this stage, with the sea state running a lot higher than ever had been experienced in training, 9 were swamped. With a screen down, all it took was a wave, 1 in 7 big waves, 7 in 7 big sets of waves, bigger, and one wave into the engine compartment, and tank was not going anywhere or doing anything. So that was the first thing, that the careful sequencing that had been so successful in rehearsals, of course, broke down as a result of the weather and the decision that Eisenhower had to make.
Okay, and do you want to just keep running us through the kind of next thing? I don't really want to stop you, to be honest. It's telling put this together so well. Just keep on the way.
There was another problem, of course, and that was really it applied to the larger landing craft, but much more particularly to the smaller landing craft coming in behind. And that was that the tidal harmonics, i.e. how high the tide was on the beach, had been calculated by the Naval Hydrography Office in Taunton and the civilian equivalent up at Liverpool, based on tidal data for Cherbourg, 65 miles away, Cherbourg, 65 miles away, and Le Havre, 25 miles away. And in between, certainly Le Havre and the beaches, there was the mouth of the river Seine, which screwed things up hugely. Suffice it to say, they got it wrong. Sorry, Navy, but you did. And the tide was far higher up the obstacles. They were supposed to have landed behind the obstacles first wave. The first wave was actually landing amongst the lower obstacles, and the tide was rising around them. There is a thing they say, the bad weather over the previous days had ponded up, the wind on water had ponded up water in the North Sea, and but even that didn't, only a few centimetres, not the 10, 20 centimetres that they landed there. The deal was that the Royal Navy clearance engineers, they would work below the tide line, and the Army engineers would work above the tide line. And they were equipped with things that worked in relatively dry situations. And of course, with the tide already around the obstacles and rising up above them fast, those obstacles were not cleared. And so rather than coming into a cleared beach, or substantially cleared beach, the LCAs, Landing Craft Assault, of the leading two companies of the East Yorks and the South Lancs, they were dodging in and around the obstacles. And many of the infantrymen's accounts of them with the mines and shells tipped with these obstacles. So huge reluctance to not reluctant, but danger for the landing craft crews. And of course, once they were on the beach, the DD tanks were still coming ashore. The breaching teams were still attempting to do their business. And of course, another factor is that the Navy had expected that their bombardment by the medium bombers would have had much, much more effect. To deal with the medium bombers first, part of the deal to go was that the likelihood of poor weather was accepted, and to make sure that they didn't bomb the beach, they had time, 3 seconds added onto their bomb run. So rather than bombing the immediate back of the beach, most of the bombs landed half a mile inland. And in addition, quite a number of batteries were obscured by cloud, and amongst those that, for a variety of reasons, were not engaged were Morris and Hillman, those two inland objectives of the Suffolk part of 8th Brigade. And then there was the naval gunfire itself. It had been aimed to drench the beach with fire. There were all kinds of craft, ranging from 16-inch battleships and monitors down to landing craft flak and concrete busting landing craft, etc., etc. The Navy told Colonel Dawson of Number 4 Commando, who was going to land behind the assault waves of 3rd Division, that when he got to Weestrum, the fire control tower there would be a heap of rubble. And I think, as most people who visit Normandy know, it's still standing there with a Norman flag on the top, with barely a dink in it. So the effect of naval gunfire, as far as destruction was concerned, was much less than expected, but they did succeed in neutralising and stunning the enemy defenders for quite a period of time. But with the delays, that effect started to wear off. And you can imagine the German officers and NCOs getting around the blokes and kicking their asses, getting their heads up, get into fire position, load your MG42, etc., etc. And so there was much more of a fight, certainly for objective Cod, which was to be taken by a company of the South Lancs from the west, and the company of the South Lancs from the East Yorks from the right. That they landed at 7:30, and they reckon it was only about 0900 hours that it was fine, that they were finally through there. The other East Yorks company had a better time at objective skate, WN Widerstandes, or resistance point 18. They got through there relatively quickly. The company landing right the way down the western end of the beach, adjacent to Lyon, they actually found a small box girder bridge laid up over that low sea wall down there, but it wasn't actually marked because the engineers had been driven off because they had to get out of their vehicle to put the flags up and all the markers up for vehicles to go over it. So they'd managed to lay it from under armour, but to complete the job, they actually had to get out on their feet, and they had effectively been driven off. So a squadron of the 13th, 18th Hussars, now down to about 50% strength, was able to get inshore and inland towards Hermanville a little way. But nowhere else for quite some time were there exits. The anti-tank guns had survived, enemy anti-tank guns had survived and need knocking out, so on and so forth. And it took quite a while for things to overcome. So the delays that started with a small delay of landing started to gradually creep up half an hour, three-quarters an hour, an hour. And as the landing progressed, there was it got better and worse rather, and had implications for the plan. In addition, the naval bombardment force that was going to be covering out to the east to deal with the batteries there, all along the coast to the west, to the east of Ouistreham, for instance, inland on the high ground behind Carbourg, and ditto on the high ground immediately behind Hulgat. There were batteries, and these were big coastal batteries, and these guns took on the Navy. Yes, they had been subdued during that 40-minute, 50-minute bombardment from dawn onwards, but now, during the course of the morning, they gradually came back into action. They have not been destroyed, and the Navy was able. These batteries would come into action for 10 or 15 minutes before the Navy neutralised them again. And remember, at a range of 25 miles, there were 15-inch guns on the cliffs above Le Havre, and they were in range as well. So, the Navy's expectation of being able to put these guns definitively out of action was not managed. They were able to neutralise them only.
And what about the kind of German response?
The German response was basically to hang on as long as possible. There was a mobile battery of 21st Panzer Division's 150mm guns. These were just inland by about 2 miles, and they were misused during D-Day in a planned attack using a company of an Ost battalion. An Ost battalion, these were the former Soviet prisoners of war, normally from the reluctant Soviet states of Azerbaijan, Georgia, and all the rest of it. And the battery commander, sort of 4 guns, bemoaning the fact that he was being misemployed as an assault gun when he wasn't. Records how the Ost battalion simply ran away. Elsewhere, the Germans, confined to their defences, really just fought it out until either they ran out of ammunition or the battering of demolition rounds from armoured vehicles, Royal Engineers, the Averies, or whatever, just simply subdued them. But the aforementioned fire control tower in Weestrum, that held out for several days.
So that initial brigade is getting onto the ground. 8th Armoured Brigade, their tanks are coming on shore, but they've lost a lot of them. What kind of time in the morning then are we starting to see the brigade that's supposed to be pushing through to Hillman, etc., and on to Caen?
Well, the initial, the Beachhead Brigade, the Assault Landing Brigade, 8th Brigade, the Suffolks, their 3rd Battalion, they were to push on inland. And they were actually moving inland, a modest delay against fairly minor opposition. They cleared through Collierville fairly quickly. The commandos of Lord Ludditt's 1st Special Service Brigade were also sort of using a bit of that route as well. So they helped considerably in the early stages, I would say between 0900 and 1000. And of course, the first real serious objective for the Suffolks was Morris, which was an artillery battery with 105 millimeter guns, 4 casemated guns, surrounded by the usual mines and wire. And they prepared to attack them. They had the support of I can't remember, it's a destroyer or a cruiser, and the bombardment, the fire support came in. The first batteries of artillery were also at this stage. They couldn't get off the beach. There were such traffic jams. They were actually firing. Their first gun position of the campaign was surrounded by the incoming tide. Just as the Suffolk's company was about to attack, out came the gunners, out came the white flags, and they surrendered. About 60 of them surrendered. So that obviated the need for them to attack. That left the Suffolks to take the main position about sort of half a mile ahead of them up on the ridge, Hillman, which was Oberst Krug's headquarters. 2 large headquarter bunkers. One was the artillery battalion headquarters, and the other was the brigade or regimental headquarters. And there was another large bunker which housed the 2 towed anti-tank guns. The rest of the bunkers, 13 in all, tended to be administrative or machine gun. So that was their next objective. But to get to it, Colonel Goodwin came up to the recce, and actually, as he was sort of trying to find somewhere that he could get a view of the battery, he met a Canadian para, one of the many paras that had been really quite seriously misdropped, in his case, to the west of the Orne. And he had been there since dawn, and this young active officer had recce the route, and he led Colonel Goodwin to a place where he could see and said, "Oh, this is where you need to do your breach," etc., etc. So gave him pretty much the plan. But this breach had to be by hand, which was slow and pretty obvious to the enemy. You can't crawl up to the enemy's wire, cut it, and then on your belly try and clear a path for minefields. Goodwin had asked for flail tanks, but none were available. It was far more important to clear the exits and the logistic areas where the beach maintenance area was going to be set up, because there's that age-old conundrum: a big fight, you need resupply of ammunition pretty quickly. So nothing was available to him. So a real underestimation of the task by the D-Day planners. And when A Company put in their assault in the early afternoon, just after midday, 1 o'clock time, they were beaten back. They got into the battery, got into the trenches that connected up the various concrete bunkers, but ultimately they were driven back. Meanwhile, what was happening? The intermediate brigade, their landing had been delayed by the combination of factors, and then the KSLI were on line Mallet at Hermanville, waiting for the tanks to arrive, and the LSTs for the tanks happened to be coming in just when the guns around Cherbourg, Houlgat, opened fire, and the LSTs turned round and went back out to sea until the gunfire had been suppressed. And it was an hour and a half late by the time the staff yeomanry turned up, by which time Colonel Morris was already on his way on foot to the Perrieres Ridge. Also going wrong for the intermediate brigade, 2nd Warwicks, who are supposed to be advancing on the right, to the right of the KSLI, who are going diddle straight up the middle. They were already running into German infantry around Cresson. Brigadier Smith, we believe, in consultation with General Rennie, the divisional commander, but of course we say believe because Brigadier Smith was relieved of his command sometime later, and of course General Rennie was killed commanding the 51st Highland Division in the Rhine crossing. So we're not entirely sure how the process of which happened. But both the Warwicks and Headquarters 185 Brigade moved round to the left, which in itself produced a further hiatus. And when the Norfolks started moving, they got very badly shot up from those machine guns that the Suffolks had been unable to capture. They had not been properly resourced to capture. And so an enduring sense of bitterness between the Norfolks and the Suffolks over this, that made their amalgamation into the 1st Battalion, the Royal Anglians, one of the most unfortunate, shall we say, amalgamations there ever was in that period in the post-war. So there was a severe hiatus. But the one man who comes out of this with credit is Lieutenant Colonel Morris. Rather than his battalion being driven to ground by the machine guns, as happened to the Norfolks, he drove them forward onto Point 61. And it could also be said, well, he did have a few advantages. He had been down in those fields at Hermanville, and he had had a good view of what was going on, of Hillman, for quite some time. Whereas the Norfolks had just come around the corner into the cornfield and they were hit. So, it's not quite as simple as to say that, but it still required some serious leadership by him to get his battalion up onto point 61. And unfortunately, parking on point 61 is really difficult these days. It's quite a fast roundabout, but actually standing anywhere up on there, you think, how the devil did they ever get up there? But the KSLI did. And roughly the same time as they were going up, the tanks arrived and added to the suppressive fire. So, full marks, but a few caveats there. And so they pushed on. But as they did so, they came down the other side of the Perriers Ridge, and there was a battery of guns that was still in place. And the brigade commander ordered a squadron and a company to peel off from this already thin force of 3 squadrons and 4 infantry companies that was going to drive all the way to Caen. So and they were left. There was X company and I think C squadron were left there doing that, and that occupied them virtually the whole time. And as, of course, the battalion headquarters went over the Perriers Ridge, VHF radios of the day, they were no longer in contact with their battalion headquarters to be told to leave it alone, get on. They actually took the battery that evening when somebody showed them a track that the Germans gunners had made in through the back of the battery. So the advance continued. It came down the slope into the villages of Beeville and Beauville. These are not marked on the captured versions of the 21st Panzer Division's maps, but it's believed that these were logistic infrastructure headquarters. And, of course, the thing with German army is, in the first instance, every soldier is a fighting infantryman first and a tradesman or a sport arm second. So they had quite a hard time. Company commander got wounded, but nonetheless, they were the KSLI were through, and then the next thing they got to was the valley of the River Dan, the stream. It's a stream, really, but this valley is very narrow and steep-sided, and was referred to in all the plans as the anti-tank obstacle, which is a bit confusing, because a mile further on, up towards Le Bissay, there's an anti-tank ditch, which is also an anti-tank obstacle. So working out who's talking about what in various accounts and on various radio exchanges is quite difficult. But suffice it to say, there was only one way across it for the tanks, and that was via the road. Bless them, a company of KSLI got across the next mile of rising open ground, supported by a platoon of tanks, and actually got into Le Bissay, which, in the words of that great veteran Noel Bell from the 8th Rifle Brigade, the place was simply groaning with Germans. And the KSLI company was isolated and on its own. The rest of the battalion still clearing bits and pieces on its axis, down to 3 companies anyway. And at this stage, the Norfolks were moving forward, and they got forward just beyond Hillman on the left. The Warwicks got involved in fighting further left. And so the KSLI were really on their own. And to cap it all, at this stage, the 21st Panzer Division's Panzers put in an appearance. This much vaunted counterattack, which was possibly expected to have been as early as 11:30, finally started late afternoon. What had happened was General Fuchtinger and his A1 were absent, in inverted commas, on personal business in Paris on the night of the 5th, 6th. The weather had been such that the Germans had concluded in most instances that no one was coming. That's the conclusion that Fuchtinger had come, and he went off to see his American jazz singer friend. And that left without the chief of staff, a junior staff officer who all he knew was that there were so many restrictions on the employment of panzers that he did basically, other than standing them to, did nothing. And the Hittenjugend Panzer Division, further east, just to the west of the Seine, they were stood to in the early hours, and they didn't get leave to move until the afternoon. But Fuchtinger realised that, I have authority to move, and when he got back at 500 hours, he immediately started planning a counterattack against the airborne, which is what his orders actually allowed him to do, but hours later than had been planned if he had been there to organise it. So the attack against the airborne forces to the east of the city in the Orne was just about to get underway when the orders came from Marx, 84 Corps, stop. There's a far more serious threat, and that's the landing to the west of the river. So orders had to be recast, and Oberst Opplam Broniatowski tried to get his troops over a bridge near Colombelles, but this bridge was under fire and observed by a ceasefire, and really it was no dice. So he was forced, so rather than a 2.5 mile change of plan, he was forced into a 7-8 mile change of plan, which saw the panzers having to go through the city of Caen, over the city bridges, through the rubble that already existed, or all the way round in a loop to the west. They've described the going through the city as attempting to thread a needle. So, and of course, this great movement of panzers had been spotted by the air forces, and which brought both the advance of the 3rd Canadian Division and the 3rd British Division to a halt. So instead of driving on, nonetheless, which would probably have been unwise, they stopped. The tanks went into hull-down positions on top of the ridge, facing sort of south and west, and the 17-pounders that were the anti-tank regiment, they were brought up also onto the Perriers Ridge as well. And so when the counterattack began between 4 and 5, the right-hand column, which was basically the Panzer Regiment, they ran straight into the defences of 185 Brigade, basically the Staffordshire Yeomanry. And of course, concealed in positions on the Perriers Ridge versus panzers moving in the open, in fairly open terrain, they prevailed. And 22nd Panzer Regiment actually did what it described as a horizon crawl, trying to find a weak point, heading north all the time and probing east. But each time they came up against the 185 Brigade. On the other flank, 192 Panzer Grenadiers, commanded by Oberst Rauch. He had much better time. He basically punched into the gap between the Brits and the Canadians. And he was able to, by 2000 hours, reach the sea. And words of the Panzer Grenadiers of seeing, coming over that final ridge and overlooking the sea and seeing the sea black with the masts of ships. And to make matters worse, at the same time, there was that throb to the north, a mass of aero engines approaching. This was the 6th Air Landing Brigade coming in to land astride the Canal de Caen, and of course Operation Rob Roy, which was the resupply of 6th Airborne Division. And from the distance, these containers hanging down from parachutes looked as if it was a big reinforcement. And the combined effect of this, seeing the ships, the vast fleet in front of them, and what they thought was paratroopers actually landing behind them, it really destroyed their morale. And the few that got into contact, what they were going to do once they reached the sea was turn left and right. This had barely started. They were seen off by tanks of the East Riding Yeomanry, which had been kept in reserve, and 9 Brigade. And then they just pulled back. So that was really the end of the drive to capture Caen on D-Day. It was repeated in a different form the following day.
So we did, the objectives of the, let's say, call them lofty objectives, not been achieved on day one. Both sides, bloody noses. What is the, if we were to break this down into phases now, the first phase being D-Day, what is the kind of the next phase in the battle for Caen?
Well, actually, to finish off phase 1, the following day, attacks were to be renewed on Le Bicet and an advance down the right flank by 9 Brigade. Suffice it to say, the renewed attack on Le Bicet was seen off by 192 Panzer Grenadiers, following what had been an incredibly lackluster performance the previous day. Overnight, they'd put together a really, really good defence. But 9 Brigade were the unfortunate ones. They had started off motoring very well. They were advancing. And then the Royal Ulster Rifles were to take over for an advance through a village called Combes, La Bijude, and on south towards Caen. But the Hitlerjugend division that was supposed to have arrived the evening before on D-Day, they finally arrived, or at least half of them did. The 25th SS Panzer Grenadiers arrived. And they advanced against 9 Brigade and the Canadians further to the right, who fought vicious actions at Orthy and Buron, whereas the Ulster Rifles, Royal Ulster Rifles, RUR, fought a bloody action at Combes. In fact, it was an encounter battle, both sides advancing. Neither side prevailed. The Hitlerjugend, the battalion of Hitlerjugend, were halted, and the Royal Ulster Rifles were also halted. And even though they tried again on D+3, it really didn't work. And that was the end of the first phase. It was quite clear that there was no way through to Caen easily. And Montgomery, as far as the second phase is concerned, closed down the First Corps as an active front, simply because, as he said in his M500 directives, we don't have enough logistics at this stage of the build-up to fight two major battles, i.e. to take Caen and to take Cherbourg. And of course, of the two, Cherbourg being a port was more important. And of course, the ability to stain over the beach through landing craft, ducks, and the Mulberry Harbours, of course, was at this stage entirely untested. So the priority was afforded to 7 Corps, which meant that 3rd Division had this period of what they described as active defence. And this meant improved digging defences, improving positions, but at the same time, once that was done, not just sitting there, but undertaking patrols, recce patrols, ambush patrols, fighting patrols out every night. Battalion and brigade, mortar platoons and concentrations, they would go out into no man's land with their Vickers or 4.2-inch mortars, set up and open fire. Fire 100 rounds of 4.2-inch mortar or 3-inch mortar, throw the mortars in the back of the carriers and get the hell out of it before German counter-battery fire could land on them. Well, that was the theory anyway. Things like that were happening all the time. And of course, during this period, which lasted really from the 8th of June through until the 8th of July, so it's a calendar month really, there were also other action. For instance, during Operation Epsom, part of Montgomery's operational art was to set the whole front alight. So there would be thrusts before, during the main operation to keep the Germans guessing and moving their reserves around, hopefully away from where they were. So with Epsom, the preliminary was Operation Martlet with 49th Division. The during distraction was Operation Mitten. This was it had a sound tactical aim, and that was to capture Chateau Leland and Londel, that sort of area, as a precursor of capturing Caen, which is what Operation Epsom was actually all about. Mitten turned out to be a bloodbath. The regiments of 8th Brigade describe it as the bloodiest square mile in Europe. They lost an awful lot of casualties, and in one of their 3rd Division's first use for the flame-throwing crocodiles, they really misused them as well. But to be fair, at this stage of the campaign, no one really knew how best to use this weapon system, which had literally only just been available in time for a handful of tanks to land on Gold Beach on D-Day. So you can't blame them. So Mitten was a failure, and Operation Avalure, which was to be a follow-on by the Canadians, was cancelled. And then we get the third phase now, where we're going to capture Caen. The initiative returns to First Corps, and in the first phase, the Canadian brigades, 9th Brigade, were going to attack the airfield complex of Carpiquet, which they did, but sadly their OPSEC hadn't been particularly good. The German divisions all had an EW, Electronic Warfare Platoon, who had a section whose sole job was to listen in to Allied nets. And after a month and a bit ashore, the Canadians on this occasion were a bit lax, and the Hitlerjugend were able to get warning that the attack was coming, and SS officer who had lain up, since been overrun during Operation Epsom, took the opportunity of bad weather and lots of Canadians moving around for himself to exfiltrate out with the information of where the FUP was forming up place. And so when the attack started, the Germans, with their tactic, they basically bombarded the now the FUP that had been vacated by the attacking troops and was being occupied by the follow-up troops. The rationale being here that the defenders would almost certainly be able to deal with the first wave on their own, and the second wave was very badly smashed up. But by this stage in the campaign, the Germans were severely lacking insufficient ammunition to do this tactic to its full extent. So to the North Shore Regiment got into the village of Carpiquet. The Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, they got into the northern hangars, and the Chaudrier as well in the middle of those two. And on the south, the southern hangars, the Royal Winnipeg Rifles managed to attack. But the Germans, they had sheltered in the heavy concrete fortifications, the shelter bunkers of the pre-invasion airfield defences around Carpiquet. And so they survived the bombardment. Yes, their fighting positions on the surface were badly smashed up, but they came out fighting. Nonetheless, in the north, the northern hangars and Carpiquet itself were captured, but the southern hangars held out against a repeated attack by the Winnipeg Rifles, who were really lacking tank support. Kurt Meyer said, was very critical of all this. Why did they do it with so few tanks? Then he would have done it with a great number of panzers. In the north, in the village, the North Shore Regiment were able to hold out against a counterattack, not by the Hitlerjugend this time, but by the Leibstandarte. Operation Windsor, this is by the Canadians, had achieved about half of its objective, but enough to make an inroad into the western defences of the city of Caen, which was a precursor for the main event, Operation Charnwood, which was to take place a little later on. On the evening of the 7th, the bombers came over, hugely controversial, but Eisenhower by this time was getting concerned about the lack of progress, particularly on the Eastern Front. Of course, it had never been in the plan that the Germans would actually stand and fight within the range of naval gunfire. Nobody thought was crazy enough to do that. But that's what Hitler had ordered. And so that's where the fighting was. And the city of Caen was to be held. No withdrawal. Even, Beatrix, your corps commander of 1st SS Panzer Corps, not so. Got to hold it. So the bombers were brought in. Eisenhower, of course, the supreme commander, had nominal control over the bomber barons, but he had to argue his case. And of course, strategic bombing and ground troops, you've got to have a big separation. And that meant that the bombing could only really take place on the top end of the city of Caen. Much criticised. Kurt Meyer, the Panzer Division commander, said they knocked over a few SBWs, half track. Actually, but if you speak to or listen to his soldiers, they will tell you what it was like. They felt isolated. They didn't get any resupply. And further to the east, the 16th Luftlandser Division, which now held that area, they were very badly hit. And the headquarters 31st Jager Regiment, which was equivalent to brigade headquarters, was taken out and destroyed. So that made things a lot easier. What often is not mentioned is there were specific medium bomber targets. There are also delay bombs that would go off sometime after H hour the following morning. And of course, following the main bombers, there were flight squadrons of Mosquitoes interdicting the city, taking on the resupply traffic that in the short hours of darkness would be pushing forward at dusk. So, and of course, the what was left of the population, a good few thousand of them, were in the school and the hospital in the southwest quarter of the city, which was not bombed. And of course, the bombing of Caen was not just the bombing of Caen. It had been under naval gunfire, RAF attack since before D-Day because of the bridges over the Orne. So to attribute all the destruction to that one 2-hour episode is incorrect. The bombing was followed by artillery. This was mainly throughout the night, 10-minute sort of concentrations every hour that really concentrate and focus on counter-battery work. And this counter-battery took place over all night until 04:30 when the main bombardment started. Big question, of course, is why was the attack not immediately following the bombardment? They had to attack in daylight, and the bombers had other tasks that they were going to do, and that was the only time on the evening of the 7th that they were available. So the attack began 05:20 hours, 3 divisions on the left, the 3rd British Division attacking through the Bissey. Their third attempt, this time they went through it and reached at the end of the day point 61 up on the ring contour 60, the original D-Day objectives of port and wine. And so, but not into the city. In the centre, the most newly arrived formation, 59th Staffordshire Division, regarded as being a well-trained division. It was the last of the 2nd Army divisions to arrive. All there were now the Canadian build-up. And I said they were regarded as good, but they suffered badly against these Hitlerjugend, who had by now a month been veteran. And of course, this was their first battle. And afterwards, brigade commander bemoaned, saying, I wish our first battle could have been against easier opposition. And of course, we can be critical about the 9th Division, but, the performance of the 15th Scottish, the 43rd Wessex, when they first arrived as well, wasn't that realistic either. But in this case, the 59th got bogged down at the farming complex at Galamange and in a trench system, almost World War I style trench system that had been dug to the south of Caen and held by 25th SS Panzer Grenadiers ever since and extended considerably. This system was one of the ones that built sort of around Christmas time in the new year by 77th Division originally. And they failed to take it. So they were lagging well behind by kilometres. On the right flank, 3rd Canadian Division began in the 2nd phase, and they fought their way through a number of defended villages with the support of the 2nd Canadian armoured brigade, and by nightfall, having taken the village of Cussy, they were going to attack the Abbey Ardennes as darkness fell. They didn't get into it, but remained on the outskirts of the Abbey, and when they came to complete its clearance the following morning, the enemy had finally gone. The SS withdrew. The Luftwaffe, the Luftwaffe Felt Division, they had basically ceased to exist and had been pulled back. They lost 75% of their infantry. And so on the 9th, the 33rd Armoured Brigade came to join up with the advance into Caen, but such was the rubble in the northern outskirts of the city that they just literally couldn't get through. Eventually, tanks were got in later in the day, but only by digging canyons, the engineers digging canyons through the rubble. The Canadians are to the west. They swung from south to southwest and then west into the city. They had far less rubble to deal with, and they were certainly the first in the city in any significant number. 3rd Division got 2 infantry battalions in there during the rest of the morning and into the afternoon. But such was the German defence. The Hitlerjugend had pulled back to the River Orne. That Phase 5 of Charnwood, the capture of the southern suburbs and industrial area, was not taken. But it took this battle over 2 days to finally take the city of Caen.
And what day would this have been? That
was the 9th of July. So fighting to get in between the 6th and the 8th of June, basically, from the north, and then that push from the west as a preliminary, and then the final 2-day attack to get in. In the meantime, the Germans had been worn down by Epsom and the other operations around there, including the Americans, and of course with Cherbourg, albeit in a terrible state, in our Allied hands. The logistics were now back with the Brits and able to launch a second major battle following Epsom.
With obviously you said that nobody expected Germans to try and make a fight for Caen. What were the losses like on their sides in terms of like this attritional kind of battle that had been going on in one way or another for just over a month by the time the city was taken?
Well, the two regimental camp groups, basically. The 26th, commanded by Moncur, had arrived on the 8th of June, and had a 5-day battle with the Canadians. They had suffered very badly, and the weight of Operation Epsom had also fallen on them. So they were very, very badly written down. The 25th SS Panzer Grenadiers, attrition had gradually eaten away at them rather than big chunks that had befallen the 26th. And they were not getting much in the way of replacements. By this time, they were not going to draw replacements. They were tending to go to the hospitals in Paris once men were on the way to recovery, and taking them out and having their own sort of rehabilitation centres, because what was happening, once you lost the soldier, he'd written off your strength, he was given to somebody else. So, that shows how the attrition that was taking place against the Germans. And signals were backing forwards. We can't hold out much longer. Generals were saying we've got to retire to the Orne, etc., etc. Why are we holding Caen? Even Dietrich, the commander of 1st SS Panzer Corps, one of Hitler's first confidants in the hurly-burly days of National Socialism in Munich, even he was begging to be relieved. So it was they were hanging on by the skin of their teeth. And of course, the 16th Luftwaffe Felt Division were not exactly the cream. They had been on coastal duties up in the Netherlands.
So, if you were to, like, I was thinking of the Saving Private Ryan line, where it's, knocking the hole. Monty's taking his time taking Caen, or whatever the Saving Private line is, a Saving Private Ryan line. Sorry, it's like the one mention the Brits get in the movie. And if you were to speak to somebody who'd seen that movie and their impression was that the British Army had taken its time taking Caen and had just been kind of cooling its heels by the beaches, could you make the argument that it was that the battle overall, despite taking as long as it did, that it was a success, that it played a part in the wider success of the Normandy campaign, or do you view it as a failure?
No, it's a success. And if you look at it in the context of Montgomery's plan, and this plan, for years it sat in various American university archives, the Bradley Archive, just to name one. Montgomery's plan was always to suck the Germans in to the eastern flank and fight them there. Montgomery knew the Germans would want to hold Caen. He knew they would not want to give ground there, simply because it was the closest bit to the Seine and a strike to the east. And at the same time, he knew from the Germans' own estimate, which we had thanks to Ultra, that the Germans considered fighting in the Bocage. What are the Americans doing there? Crazy. They're not going anywhere. So we'll put all our eggs in the basket around Caen. And so we end up with best part of 6 Panzer divisions facing the Brits, and part of one. Later they moved, true, as it became apparent what was happening. So that was what was happening. The fight was on in the centre and the left, which allowed the Americans A to take Cherbourg, and B to fight south down towards St. Lo, through that terrible Bocage, the hedgerow country down there. Bradley came to Montgomery one of his meetings saying, "Oh, I failed," and the Americans were finding it very, very difficult in the Bocage, and they would have found it even more difficult if the Brits hadn't sort of kept the majority of the German armour certainly over on the eastern flank. So, swings and roundabouts. The Americans did have a very big fight.
Yeah. So, Tim, what's something that you maybe didn't expect to find in your research when you got into this project? I'm sure you probably went in knowing that you had certain kind of ideas about how things went. What was something that really surprised you?
Oh, one thing, very small thing. In the afternoon or the morning rather, of the 9th, the second day of Charnwood, the 12th Hitlerjugend's Begleit company, known as, that's their escort company, quite a powerful little organisation. Anyway, it's a company, it's a big big company, small battalion. They were covering the withdrawal as best they could. And a number of soldiers had got isolated, and they were it was all quiet. They were burying some of their comrades. They knelt down to say a prayer, SS soldiers, alongside their grave. And when they looked up, there were a whole load of British soldiers standing around the top of the quarry. And much to the surprise of these two young Panzer Grenadiers, they were allowed to walk away. That simple act of Christianity, fellow feeling, cuts through to even the hardest soldiers' heart. And I do suspect these would have been soldiers from the 59th Division who hadn't been hardened and brutalised by a month of fighting the SS. But still, that was a struggle.
Great point. Yeah, that's a great story. Tim, I'm sure this could be another book in itself, but or maybe it already is in the two that you have there. But what would you say are the kind of the top line points of the lessons of Caen?
Well, first of all, from the initial attacks, the perform by the British, the initial response by the Hitlerjugend, and by the committal of the 59th Division, combat experience checks an awful lot of things. Knowing the simple things, knowing the sound of your tanks, the enemy's tanks, what he's likely to do, incoming, outgoing, even the best training really doesn't quite cut that. So that's one of the big lessons. And speaking as a former infantryman, the power and the importance of artillery. The guns for Charnwood numbered 600, and it was still a hard fight, but without those guns, the army would have, or First Corps certainly would have struggled. And purchase of 14 Archer systems today versus 600 guns. I think we need to do much more in the way of artillery.
Big fan of artillery, yeah. So, yeah, consider me persuaded. Tim, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, it's. I'd just like to say that I hope this has given people a little bit more of an insight into the how realistic it was to take Caen. Because, of course, though, when we read our Normandy books, somewhere in the first chapter, there is always that statement that says Montgomery had failed to take Caen on D-Day after a month. It's slightly more complicated than that. And the priorities to go for a port and going for somewhere where the enemy wasn't quite as strong, or there was greater room to manoeuvre, i.e., with Epsom. Those factors certainly delayed the taking of Caen.
Tim, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.